You took out a full-page ad in major U.S. newspapers last year criticizing U.S. foreign policy. What would you do differently, Donald?
I'd make our allies, forgetting about the enemies you can't talk to so easily, I'd make our allies pay their fair share. We're a debtor nation. Something's going to happen over the next number of years with this country, because you can't keep going on losing $200 billion, and yet we let Japan come in and dump everything right into our markets and everything. It's not free trade. If you ever go to Japan right now and try to sell something, forget about it, Oprah. Just forget about it. It's almost impossible. They don't have laws against it. They just make it impossible. They come over here, they sell their cars, their VCRs, they knock the hell out of our companies. And hey, I have tremendous respect for the Japanese people. I mean, you can respect somebody that's beating the hell out of you, but they are beating the hell out of this country. Kuwait, they live like kings. The poorest person in Kuwait, they live like kings. And yet they're not paying. We make it possible for them to sell their oil. Why aren't they paying us 25% of what they're making? It's a joke.
This sounds like political presidential talk to me, and I know people have talked to you about whether or not you want to run. Would you ever?
Probably not, but I do get tired of seeing the country ripped off.
Why would you not?
I just don't think I really have the inclination to do it. I love what I'm doing. I really like it.
Also, it doesn't pay as well.
No, it doesn't. But, you know, I just probably wouldn't do it, Oprah. I probably wouldn't, but I do get tired of seeing what's happening with this country. And if it got so bad, I would never want to rule it out totally, because I really am tired of seeing what's happening with this country, how we're really making other people live like kings, and we're not.
You've said, though, that if you did run for president, you believe you'd win.
Well, I don't know. I think I'd win. I tell you what, I wouldn't go in to lose. I've never gone in to lose in my life. And if I did decide to do it, I think I'd be inclined, I would say that I would have a hell of a chance of winning, because I think people, I don't know how your audience feels, but I think people are tired of seeing the United States ripped off. And I can't promise you everything, but I can tell you one thing: this country would make one hell of a lot of money from those people that for 25 years have taken advantage. It wouldn't be the way it's been, believe me.
That's your president. That's your president, ladies and gentlemen. This is the guy who's been dreaming about this for half a century, 50 years of wanting to do something, having no power to do it, and he just did it. He just finally did it. He got his revenge. No more being taken advantage of. American people put first. So we're going to talk about some economic theory, how our country's been gutted by these people who now import vultures to pick at the bones of our civilization, some American history with trade policy, economic policy, protectionism, the Japanese, all sorts of fun stuff, all sorts of good stuff. And this is the subtle brilliance of Make America Great Again, because like with so many other things, Trump is just restoring our country from what will end up being regarded as like this temporary disruption in our nation's way of doing things historically. And that's what these tariffs are. So Trump announced a baseline 10% tariff on imports with steeper reciprocal levies on goods from a slew of other nations, including Europe, Japan, China. And this announcement is going to be regarded as what ended this like free trade era that's defined global commerce for decades. In a call with reporters before the Rose Garden event, White House officials said the institutions that would have governed world commerce, quote, no longer fit the times. So yeah, we're done with the post-war order. Trump even called it the most important day in American history, Liberation Day, right? And these reciprocal tariffs hit dozens of nations, including some of our country's largest trade partners. And Trump said the published rates are half as high as they originally calculated. So we're already being nice. That's what Trump said. He said to the foreign presidents, prime ministers, kings, queens, ambassadors, everyone else who will soon be calling to ask for exceptions from these tariffs, I say, terminate your own tariffs. Drop your barriers. Don't manipulate your currencies. You can't do it. It can't happen. And this had to be done at some point. We understand that. We're in a mess. We're in an ugly situation. Our economy is not even real. And I'm not going to tell you that it's not going to sting a little bit. It stings, doesn't it? But again, like what we've been doing for the past several decades has us riding this wave that was inevitably going to crash. It was going to crash hard. So that being said, ignoring the more practical considerations, sometimes it is just really worth it for the entertainment value. You know, it's like you've got like all the Occupy Wall Street people, that whole class of people. These are the people who genuinely believe that we needed to evaluate these companies based on how many minorities they were hiring, how many environmental patronage schemes they were subsidizing. Now, those people are pulling their hair out because stock prices may suffer a bit. Like, I know these people don't actually have beliefs. Like, I know that their politics are just a series of rationalizations for their resentment against normal American patriots, for why they're addicted to touching their own pee-pee. But sometimes it's fun to stress test that, right? Like, these people get all worked up about the stock market, about the health of our largest corporations, etc., despite it being completely incompatible with everything else they've ever expressed, every other concern they've ever had with anything ever at any point. And again, I'm not pointing out the hypocrisy. I don't hold them to a standard. I'm not so naive. I'm just reminding you, these are not real people. You don't have to treat them like they're real people. You don't have to take them seriously. You don't have to waste your time. It's not real. So for 50 years, they have destroyed the American middle class, which historically has been our base, historically been the target of the bad guys, because it's the only legitimate force of opposition against the bad guys who, are trying to destroy the middle class, destroy our country, and we are trying to build the middle class and our country back up. And that's what's so funny is like all these libtards are pretending like they didn't purposefully destroy the economy with lockdowns and then keep that economy in the gutter under the Brandon administration. And so now they're like, well, these tariffs are going to hurt the economy. What economy? What are you, fractional reserve banking, weird debt, paying for Domino's pizza in installments, Uber, my service jobs, my email jobs, HR specialists, consultant. Like, what are you talking? What economy? We don't produce anything. The iron law of economics is that production equals prosperity. How can you expect to prosper if you're unproductive? Trump understands this. We get so caught up in the exciting stuff, immigration policy, foreign policy. It's also exciting. We forget that there is a third musketeer in the Trump political platform, something which he's been very publicly concerned about for decades, and that is, of course, trade policy. One of the first questions he asked to the American public as a presidential candidate was, when's the last time you saw a Chevrolet in Tokyo? I mean, he's done business all over the world. He understands how these things work much more than our politicians do, probably even more than our economists do, because again, the people who pay the economists to write these things that justify what they're going to do anyway, those are the politicians. Those are the NGOs, the universities. And I don't want to get too into like the economic theory, unless you want me to, but economics, like anything that you learn in school, any set of ideas you learn in school, it sounds good on paper, it sounds good in theory, but then it yields, we'll say, much different results in practice in the real world. So for those who don't know what any of this stuff means and just want to hate liberals, patriot, a tariff is essentially a tax on imports. So, you get something from a country, there's a 10% tariff on it, you're going to pay a 10% tax on that because, anything you freaking tax, you get less of. And so it discourages imports and encourages domestic consumption and manufacturing. This does, make things more expensive in the short run, but I would argue it's just, one of those things that's going to have to happen. We have to take this on the chin. This had to happen, okay, at some point in this country because our economy is not real. Moreover, I would say that, this does impose some benefit on the consumer because it's going to be offset by the benefits of living under a Trump administration rather than a Brandon administration. I mean, you look at the prices of all sorts of things and they're going down. And in the long run, this is going to be very good for us anyway. So relax. I'm okay with feeling a little bit of heat in the short run. Additionally, it's also a negotiating tactic because other countries, which all put heavy tariffs on us, by the way, they don't want their goods to be taxed because they want to keep selling them to us. And so if we threaten them with tariffs, then we get them to play ball. People told me this wasn't true, but like literally every country Trump has tried to do this with has bent the knee so far. And look, I'm a realistic guy, okay? I like doing what works, but most unfortunately, economic theory actually does matter. We do have to have some sense of what's going on because it's not enough to just look at a bunch of data points and be like, oh, okay, these things are good, these things are bad. If you don't have a theory to interpret them and like explain them and connect them, you're just going to be shooting in the dark. Like, why does this plane fly? Why does this one not? Can't we just do what works? It's like, well, we know what works and we know what doesn't work because we have the theory of aerodynamics and we can explain these things, right? So we need economic theory. And of course, there are bad economic theories. There are very bad economic theories, which have gotten us into a little bit of trouble. But there are also some good economic theories, which just so happen to be historically justified, though not so much recently, quite intentionally. And the basic theory of free trade, which is what we learn in school, again, to implicitly justify everything that happens, is that if countries specialize in producing goods that they have a comparative advantage in producing and can trade with each other without barriers, then overall economic satisfaction and efficiency and well-being will increase. It's simply not true. That's just like not how it works. Again, very pretty on paper, not real, death penalty, you're gone. But we don't want to get too into the weeds with the theory. But it is important to understand that the theory of free trade follows the theory of everything else that our government does, which is that the national doesn't even exist. There's no reason that the American people should be prioritized through a form of economic nationalism because they're not even real, like how we used to be real and we used to be prioritized. And this isn't controversial, by the way. Every nation which has ever become wealthy has done so with protectionism. That's how America became wealthy too. Every man on Mount Rushmore was a protectionist, including even Thomas Jefferson. Finally came around after the War of 1812. This is the American way. And the free trade wealth of nations, that is a subversion of our history because like with everything else, they want to destroy our nation and they want to destroy its sovereignty. Wealth of Nations, by the way, was written quite conveniently after Britain had spent centuries using protectionism to become wealthy. But historically, America imposed tariffs on 95% of our imports with an average tariff of like 37% during our economic climb during the early 19th century up until the mid 20th century. And for decades, the United States government was receiving over 80% of its revenue through tariffs on foreign goods instead of through taxes on the income of its citizens, which is what it does now. However, now U.S. tariffs are among the lowest in the world, making America the most import-pressured country in the world, at least prior to Liberation Day. Like the current Chinese tariff average is like 300% higher than the United States. Europeans like 50% higher. The world average too is more than twice the United States. So it's like, you want to talk about free trade? Okay, this is leveling the playing field. Everybody else was doing it to us. They were making a killing off it. We're doing it back. And now suddenly, well, we're the ones breaking from the freaking global free trade agreement. We're supposed to live in a commune. It's like, okay, the point being, again, iron law, production equals prosperity. We don't produce anything, but we do consume things. We do buy things. Speaking of buying things, buy 3, get 1 free. Listen, we got to talk about Undertac, the world's best boxer briefs. Science proved that. Operations in Africa, the harshest terrain. Undertac is not just underwear, it's tactical gear built for tough missions, from worldwide rucking expeditions to just your day-to-day. It's made with the most premium fabrics you can even conceive of. 50% more moisture wicking than cotton. It keeps you cool, keeps you dry, and keeps you locked in. You must consider the secret evasion pocket, discreetly storing critical items like handcuff keys, micro SD cards, crypto data, emergency cash when the stakes are the most high. You pair them with the merino socks, the Urban Ops hoodie, built tough, keeps you cozy, keeps you comfy, whether it's at the range, in the field, or just hanging out on the couch. For a limited time only, Undertac is giving you a free pair with your next purchase, so do not wait. Undertac.com, use code Doyle. You buy 3 and then you get 1 for free. That's the equation for profit. And also the profits that they make, they don't even make because they donate to veteran-run organizations fighting human trafficking groups. So support American heroes, secure your stuff, and then wear the gear that doesn't quit. Undertac's got your 6. Use code Doyle. Buy 3, get 1 free. The offer's not going to last. Act quickly. You know what they say. Around Undertac, you can relax. Very important. We continue. So yeah, we don't produce. Therefore, we can't be expected to be prosperous. We've been getting ripped off. Donald Trump understands this. He understands that tariffs are a negotiating tactic, which clearly have been working, and likewise, they will restore American manufacturing and get the boot off our necks from these other countries. Any pain that we feel in the short term is going to be offset by the returns on the investment into our future, into the future of our young people, or the pain will be non-existent anyway, simply due to the concurrent benefit of not feeling the economic pain of a libtard administration now that Trump and his tariffs are in office. And we knew the tariffs were coming. He could not have been more open about this. I mean, forget just what he campaigned on this cycle. You look back at what he was saying 50 years ago. So sorry if your portfolio took a hit, but you could have prepared for this. And to be honest, American towns have been completely hollowed out and destroyed for decades because they couldn't compete with third world poverty wages and child labor, which contributed to the value of those stock portfolios. So I don't really care. I mean, you made your money as a byproduct of the gutting of our nation. I don't blame you. I'm not saying that makes you a bad person. I think the architects of the system are bad people. I'm just saying that just as the baby boomers didn't really think twice about that because it meant more for them, I'm not really going to think twice about this if it means, restoring our economy and providing a future for my generation. Some stock portfolios dip into the red for a little bit. Pull yourself up by your boots. Let's not be a snowflake about this. This needed to happen. It had to happen at some point. We were not going to survive as an economy, as a country, without this happening. Just a matter of when the Band-Aid comes off. And I know industrial policy is cringe. It's dreadfully 2021, but this is what has worked for us. This is what has been subverted. And arguably, this is the cause of our inception as a nation. One could argue the cause of our inception as a nation, industrial policy. The American Revolution being a war over industrial policy where you've got the commercial elite of the colonies revolting against being forced into an inferior role by the British in the emerging Atlantic economy, since Britain wanted America to supply raw materials while denying us any real manufacturing capacity of our own. That's why the American Revolution is characterized by very aristocratic aesthetics. That's why our founding fathers are empowdered wigs and they live on beautiful estates rather than being a perhaps more typically historical mob of peasants. But yeah, it's no coincidence at all that upon achieving independence from Britain, the second bill signed by President Washington was a tariff. The first bill was like procedural guidelines or something. The first real bill was concerning tariffs. They are as American as apple pie. And we understood this until the 20th century. It made us a lot of money. It established us. It gave us a place at the table. But then you get into the 20th century. And of course, like many things in the 20th century, it just started going horribly wrong for us. And that probably started under the Wilson administration because arch-libtard Woodrow Wilson was like the first president to support free trade. Franklin Roosevelt, again, another arch-libtard, echoed this because of his Marxist belief that the underlying cause of war is economic dissatisfaction. And some would say that this couldn't be the case because, they'll say that FDR expanded our industrial base to fight in the Second World War or whatever. The lore with this is that you've got the Great Depression. He gets into office, and it was very popular to incorrectly blame the Depression on the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, and this remained popular to justify all of this movement away from protectionism throughout the 20th century, and it's still popular today, even though Milton Friedman disputed this idea to the Nobel Committee, and they were satisfied by his explanation in the 1970s. So FDR, of course, for some reason, he's got all these communists in his orbit. No one knows why. But that allowed for the proliferation of this really Marxist-coded idea that the cause of war is always economic dissatisfaction and jealousy, and so if we simply have free-flowing trade, we can have freaking world peace. So by 1937, we'd cut tariffs with countries ranging from Canada and France to Guatemala and El Salvador, and this is about when our tariffs started to come down for good. And the responsibility for this is generally awarded to Roosevelt's Secretary of State, who was actually cited by the Nobel Committee as being the leader in the movement for low tariffs. So with his help, Roosevelt was able to kind of like quietly assimilate this idea of low tariffs, freaking free-flowing trade, world peace into his New Deal consensus, and then he was delegating that to officials at the State Department and away from Congress, which had previously managed it. So tariffs were coming down, trade was up, everyone began to support this, not because they thought it was necessarily like better than what we'd been doing, but because they felt that it was good politically. The left liked it because I'm a freaking global commune, free trade, whatever, and then the right liked it because they wanted to build up the economies of non-communist countries and keep them aligned with the United States rather than the Soviet Union, which is something that even Big Mark acknowledged recently in an interview as being the strategy, which he noted is outdated, to say the least. So the benefits of this lasted for about 15 years. Everything seemed like it was going great, but by the early 1960s, the signs were beginning to show that this wasn't just going to build up the low-end industries in the poor countries, the developing countries, so that we could build up the high-end industries because of a freaking comparative advantage, but rather that we were actually repeating the same mistake that the British had made a century prior by thinking that these short-term benefits would translate into long-term benefits for us, when in fact, as we would learn, they would not. So just as John Kennedy's Hart-Celler Act in 1965 was America's wrong turn on immigration, our wrong turn on trade really began with his Trade Expansion Act in 1962. I have no idea why people on the right like JFK, other than that they're stupid. And from then on, pretty much everything began spiraling out of control to where we are now with deficits, offshoring, losing our jobs, losing our industries, and thereby gutting our economy into whatever it is now. Remember, production equals prosperity. And again, you notice there tends to be a one-to-one correlation between those who are pro-open borders with immigration and those who are pro-open borders with economics, like John Kennedy. It's because they reject the idea of the nation. It's just a place, nothing more, totally plastic, totally interchangeable, exchangeable. Trump is, of course, the opposite. Though I will always support the idea that JFK would have loved Trump because it's good optics. We're not demystifying Kennedy anytime soon, may as well lean into it. But for us, you and me, we can be a little bit more honest. Now, Reagan, he is not as much of a villain as a lot of people want to paint him to be with this. He's not the main culprit. He viewed free trade as basically good, but he was willing to deviate from it occasionally when he viewed it to be harmful, such as when he famously put tariffs on motorcycles to save an American icon, the Harley-Davidson motorcycle. But because he wasn't motivated by like a stronger, maybe more ideological critique of free trade than just like, yeah, man, sometimes it doesn't work. Because of that, the last major attempt to really return America to its economic roots and create like a full-blown industrial policy occurred between 1983 and 1985. But the free marketeers in the Reagan administration quickly allied with the establishment to kill that and kill any serious reform. And this is going to bring us to Japan, which we're really going to talk more about in a second. But I saw someone reply to me once saying like, oh, we need to be studying the MITI, which is the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, which was a part of the Japanese government following the Second World War, and it's what helped build them up into the economy that they are today. But as we just said, like we actually did try something like that under the Reagan administration, but the Lulberts and his coalition quickly allied themselves with the establishment to kill it, and they succeeded. Like America was very interested in Japan's industrial policy in the 1980s, but unfortunately, it remained just an interest. It was one of the many problems with the famous Reagan coalition, Lulberts quickly allying with the establishment to kill any legitimate opposition. It's a tale as old as time. But since then, of course, it's been total open borders, total globalism, open borders in every sense of the term. No serious opposition to this consensus until Donald Trump, the Clintons, Bushes, all these people, total free trade globalists, and resultantly, our economy sucks. Our young people are despondent. They don't believe that they will ever actually achieve a lifestyle similar to that of their parents, much less their grandparents, but the road is actually changing. There's a path forward. That's why young men shifted so significantly towards Donald Trump, because he actually offered a change, a restoration. And the breaking of these orthodoxies, the slaughtering of these sacred cows, it's exciting to see. I'm enjoying. Maybe things can happen. I'm a big believer in that, because it was getting a little ridiculous, to say the least. Like, it turns out you can't actually have freaking comparative advantage when you're dealing with people who will literally debase themselves and work under any conditions with no regulations, no safety regulations. They'll put kids to work. Everything they do becomes a scam. It's all deceptive and cheating. They're very sneaky. Not exactly talking about a deal between John Doe and Joe Sixpack here. With the third world, it tends to be like a race to the bottom. And this is not unknown. Like, this debate is the eternal question of economics and trade. Which is why it's so funny that Trump just keeps advancing down this skill tree of being this world historic figure in all these categories. But again, people don't know this because it was concealed from them. But if you look into it, the real battle throughout the world historically in terms of economics has not been between capitalism and communism or Marxism, whatever. Like, Adam Smith and Karl Marx formed the basis of 20th century economic theory, but that's actually separate from 20th century economic practice, which is in alignment with what we've been talking about, practiced by all economic powers, and this continued to be the case until the aftermath of the Second World War. So in the grand scheme of things, yeah, Marxism, of course, has been a revolutionary and disruptive and poisonous force. But in terms of economics, it's simply just not relevant. It is nationalism versus capitalism. The national versus the international, or the anti-national. And the international, anti-national, of course, these are synonyms for globalism, which is spiritually Marxist in some sense, I guess you could say. But it's like, okay, if you want a good contemporary example of this, what we've been talking about, let's talk about our friends over in Japan. I was never a weeb or anything. The closest thing to anime I've ever watched was maybe like Avatar: The Last Airbender, but I've developed a real love for Japan in just the past few years as sort of like a flower blooming from a more deeply rooted hatred of the Chinese, which I know is like boomer tier, Machai comes. I promise you I can make it more interesting than that. But you flash back to 1945, okay? Japan, 1945, economically destroyed. Cities in ruins, its empire's done, it's over. They're worse off than even some African nations, which didn't even get atom bombs dropped on them. And that is kind of awesome. I will say that it took that to get them to surrender. I respect it. I respect the nobility. I respect the honor. What can I say? No hard feelings. But comparing Japan to the country that dropped those bombs, us, in 1945, and even to other countries throughout the world, it seemed like the pecking order had pretty much been established and solidified for the next million years. Like, there was no way that Japan was going to be able to catch up. Maybe if they played their cards right, they could kind of become like the Philippines, this little island economy. It was pretty much over for them. That was the expectation. Why wouldn't it be? I mean, America believes in free trade and comparative advantage. And Japan only had comparative advantages in low value industries. So there wasn't really a way out from that perspective, right? If you're looking at it through that model. Now, there's actually an amusing anecdote about this, which kind of sums up the entire problem with the, post-war era trade policy. And it comes from 1955, when the U.S. and Japan were negotiating their first post-occupation trade agreement. And the head of the American delegation told the Japanese that they should cut their tariff on imported cars. Because in his words, the United States is the largest and the most efficient producer of cars in the world. The industry is strongly in favor of expanding opportunities for global trade, but its access to these foreign markets is being limited by import controls. And while the United States appreciates that some countries have to, impose certain import restrictions because of payment reasons, it would actually be in Japan's best interest to import automobiles from the United States and export items which Japan could excel in producing. Comparative advantage. I took Econ 101 and 102 in my American public school. I know how this works, airtight. However, the Japanese saw it a bit differently. They said, if the theory of international trade was taken to its ultimate conclusion, well, then the United States would specialize in the production of automobiles and Japan would specialize in the production of tuna. Needless to say, viewing this exchange decades later, hindsight's 2020, the Japanese did not decide to become a nation of fishermen. Instead, its leaders came to the same conclusion that Alexander Hamilton had come to 150 years earlier, and that Henry VII had come to 300 years before that, where they decided to opt for protectionism and industrial policy. They closed their markets to foreigners in industries that they wished to enter, and they only welcomed foreign goods insofar as they helped build Japan up, Japan's own industries. In other words, they viewed the economy not as an end in itself, but as an instrument of national power. They recognized the national, and so the government encourages and protects the industries which it believes to be important to the national, which all governments do. The idea that the state and the economy have ever been separate is one of the myths of liberalism. even our state does that, but our state protects the industry of raping and pillaging the American middle class and American patriots, which is extremely profitable. It's a tough industry to break into. The price of entry is literally your soul. So does Japan produce tuna today? Like probably, I don't know. You know what I know they produce though? Automobiles. They produce cars. They make more cars than we do several times over, and they're mostly for export. Not good. I want to see a Chevrolet in Tokyo again. I want to win again. Keyword being again. This was the predominant attitude throughout Western history, particularly in Britain and its outgrowth, the United States of America. But yeah, Adam Smith can come in and write his ad hoc Wealth of Nations after Britain spends, centuries using these economic theories to build up their wealth, build up their power. Gay wad. And again, I don't want to be a theory cell here. I don't want to get too into the weeds with it, but even the most popular free trade arguments are just wrong and they're just bad. We'll go through a couple. America is the world's richest country, and we're free traders. That means free trade must be good. You're ignoring historic short-term trends, okay? Over the last century, America became the richest country, became committed to free trade. Now we're plummeting. Now we're dying. Short-term prosperity is lagging. Much of the evidence for America's global dominance is even in question. Like our output per man hour, much less impressive than, the rest of the free world. Some might argue our currency is unsustainable. It's overvalued. Income inequality is greater than any other, developed country or whatever, which, yes, that does matter for the health of an economy, not just because we want to give free stuff to people, like how it's commonly used or invoked. Free trade brings high quality jobs and reduces low quality jobs. Like what? At Panda Express, those high quality Chipotle jobs, the unpaid internships. The hard data shows that America's losing both high quality and low quality jobs. Every engineering industry is on pace to lose workers. There have been serious declines, only upheld by Silicon Valley types, which again, they're now laying people off at record rates. Moreover, the thinking which guides all of this, in which we are repudiating and replacing open borders, no nation, globalism, of course, brings with it immigration policies, which just accelerate all of these things. Open borders and trade, open borders and immigration. No, it's done. It's all downstream from the same thinking, which has infected our country, which is anti-national. Trump is the opposite of all of that. That's why his policies on both of these issues are unprecedented for modern times and why he faced so much pushback from the establishment, which understood the threat that he posed, and he's now fulfilling. There are no physical borders and there are no economic borders because there is no you. There is no American people. It's just a zone. It's all arbitrary. And so everything can be free flowing and your interest is not prioritized. America first versus America last. Actually, more like America first versus America doesn't even exist. Oh, well, free trade actually brings savings to consumers because they buy cheaper imports, and that outweighs the cost of, losing the manufacturing jobs that would have been brought domestically from producing the goods domestically. Okay, idiot. Since George Bush took office, we've lost, 5.5 million manufacturing jobs? Over that, actually. And that's just up to 2020. We haven't had any net job growth for Americans since COVID. And when you remove government spending from the equation, I don't even think our GDP has grown since 2008. Well, offshoring is actually just a tiny phenomenon. No, it's the result of free trade. Big problem. Alan Blinder, former vice chair of the Fed, he said that it's ultimately going to affect up to 40 million American jobs. Oh, well, free trade is good because billions across the globe are now hungry for American goods. What goods? We're running a trade deficit with China? With the rest of the world? China and other foreign nations deliberately block imports in order to decrease their trade deficits. We're the only ones getting screwed. Many of these markets continue to be non-approachable by the American market. Where are the Chevys in Tokyo, idiot? I see the Hondas in Detroit, idiot. I want the Chevys in Tokyo too. I'm a big equality guy. It's like my whole thing. Hey guys, if you like this video, leave it a thumbs up, leave it a comment, subscribe to the channel, turn on post notifications so that you are notified in the event that I post, and share the video with a friend. Share it with your favorite, free marketeer, your favorite Adam Smith. I almost said Alan Lichtman, who's another libtard. Your favorite Adam Smith appreciator. I almost wore my Adam Smith tie just to sort of do a little bit of performance irony, but I opted out. And then you could also share the video with your favorite arch libtard who is very concerned about the health of the American stock market and portfolios and the wealth of the top 1% and, all that good stuff. So, okay, we'll see you later. Love you. Bye-bye. God bless you. God bless America. Okay.